Good Tuesday morning to you. Many of us believe that the sequence of events involving the United States and Iran began on December 27th. That's been a 3-week confrontation. In fact, it goes back 40 years. And in particular, the idea that Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the Quds Force, was a legitimate target, and he was, took shape in the Trump administration much earlier than we had believed, according to a new report by Carol Lee and Courtney Kube of NBC News. Courtney, of course, is familiar to anyone who saw my MSNBC show. She was often a guest. Good morning, Courtney. It's great to have you join us.
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
Give us the rundown on, it's a big story. You and Carol have a big story here about when President Trump decided that Soleimani was a target.
Yeah, thanks. This took a lot of work, this story. So we learned that the Trump administration actually began tracking Soleimani early on in early 2017, just keeping an eye on him. But then it was last summer. You remember, of course, in May, when late on a Sunday night, we got a statement out of the White House from then National Security Advisor John Bolton saying that the U.S. was deploying a bunch of additional assets into the CENTCOM region. And it quickly became clear that that was because of some specific threat from Iran. We found out later, of course, that was some ballistic missiles they were moving around and concerns that they were getting ready. They were preparing to fire them at U.S. assets in the region. So that was when Qasem Soleimani first became a possible target, when the administration and military leaders were sitting down and talking through, okay, what are we going to do in our worst case scenario and our best case scenario if, in fact, Iran attacks? They decided that Soleimani would be on the target list, but there were conditions. One of them was that President Trump would have to give the sign-off. He would have to give the authorization to actually go after Soleimani. But also, they looked at this as one of the most extreme strategic options. So it was, if in fact Iran or Iranian proxies killed Americans, this was one of the things that they were looking at doing.
Now, Courtney, yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, actually a couple of days ago, from the Carnegie Endowment, Kareem Sajapur had a great piece in The Sinister Genius of Qasem Soleimani. I read it all on the show yesterday. I've known about Soleimani for literally a decade and a half, maybe 2 decades. I asked President Trump about it during the primary campaign. He famously didn't. Nobody got up to speed, obviously. But what you're reporting tells me that I did not know is that there was a debate within the administration over a period of many months about whether or not to take him out. General McMaster, National Security Advisor number 2, we're on number 4 now, Robert O'Brien, was against it. John Bolton was for it, obviously. O'Brien was for it. Mark Esper, according to your reporting, was for it. Would you describe for the audience that process by which they went back and forth about whether or not and when and where to take out Soleimani?
So there was, our reporting only reflects one specific time that they actually, with the exception of back in June, when they first added him to the target list and sort of did like the red teaming, trying to figure out exactly what it would mean and the implications, the second and third order effects of actually killing him. But then in June, you'll remember Iran shot down a U.S. drone.
Yes.
That was when Ambassador Bolton, again, then still National Security Advisor, he pushed the idea of taking him out then. But obviously, the White House, President Trump, decided not to. That's the only other time that we know specifically. So then you fast forward, you mentioned this attack on December 27th on K1, which is an Iraqi military base near Kirkuk. That was when the idea was re-upped. And there's been a lot of back and forth about, what was the reaction and when the president decided to do this. Well, the military, when they looked at these options, because every single time they consider options, you have to consider the exact frame of what's happening right at that moment and what would be happening at the time of any kind of a retaliation. They had an option here to take out Qasem Soleimani in what the military would call a clean strike. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. It was the middle of the night on this perimeter road. It hugs right along the commercial side of Baghdad International Airport. I've driven along that road about a half dozen times just in the last 2 months. And I can tell you never see any other vehicles, even at a normal time of night.
Let's pause on that for a second, Courtney. So you exit the airport. Would he have landed at what we would call a private aviation? He wouldn't have come through Terminal C, right? And then, walk from the plane to a waiting convoy of vehicles. Does it exit then directly onto the road? And how long a stretch of road is it where you don't see other vehicles?
So our reporting is actually that Mohandas, the head of Kataib Hezbollah, drove up in the sedan right up to the airplane, walked up a ramp, and came back down with Soleimani. The two of them got into a sedan and started driving away. there was a big passenger van that also pulled up and got some other people and I think some luggage and things. They loaded up, and then the van sped up around the sedan, and then they started going along this perimeter road. I think it's actually technically still the property of the airport. There's large T-walls on each side, blast walls basically, but it's a long stretch of completely unmarked road. I mean, you feel like you're just driving and driving and driving, and you don't really see anything on either side because there's these large T-walls. But you can drive along there for miles.
Okay.
It feels like without seeing anyone.
So when you say a blast wall, how high do they go?
They've got to be probably 12 feet high in most locations. They're pretty high.
So if you're a sniper on the ground, you can't target a vehicle if you're a sniper on the ground. You can't see it.
I don't know how you could unless you were in a very high up position. But I mean, in this case, we know the U.S. military was tracking the plane as it landed. They watched it from drones. I mean, there were a number of locations where U.S. military and leaders were watching this all over the world as it happened. They watched Soleimani come down, get into the vehicle. They watched the vehicle drive away. I mean, my colleague Ken Delaney and I put a story out about it last Friday. We talked to a number of people who were watching the feeds and described them all very consistently to exactly what it looked like.
Let me come back to that in a second. I want the listeners to understand the sequence, which you have detailed in the story with Carol Lee yesterday. There had been a series of attacks on American bases in October and November using 107 millimeter rockets. Then an attack on Al-Assad Air Base in Anbar Province on December 3rd. Not the big attack. The big attack would come later. That has been detailed in other places in the last 2 days. But then on December 27th, Kataib Hezbollah launched 30 rockets at an Israeli base in Kirkuk. Now, it's called the K-1. You mentioned that. Those rockets, how deadly are those rockets? Are those like Roman candle rockets, or are they like the ballistic missiles Iran sent over?
So it seems they're definitely not like the ballistic missiles. They're smaller rockets. But I mean, look, the reality is if targeted correctly, although I don't have a ton of targeting capability on these things, but if they hit the right location, they can be deadly. And that's what it proved on December 27th is it not only killed the American contractor who was an interpreter, but 4 American service members were wounded and 2 Iraqis were wounded. So, in this case, it was more just it was just such an enormous barrage of missiles that came in. And they remember the U.S. when even these more crude ones, they don't always have the ability to defend against them. It's not like there's a missile defense system that defends against a 120 millimeter rocket. I'm
talking, if you're just joining us, with Courtney Kube of NBC News. You can follow her on Twitter at @CKubeNBC, and for the benefit of the Steelers fans, that's capital C, capital K, UBE, NBC. Courtney, now then, is your reporting that we would have stopped had they stopped? But after our retaliation against KH, which killed a number of KH people, they then attacked our embassy. Is it your belief, your reporting, that we would not have killed Soleimani had at that point they not attacked the embassy?
So that's not actually clear based on the number of people, because it was this continuing conversation. So I really believe that they hadn't decided. That on a day-to-day they were looking at the situation and as the events were evolving, and they had not yet, they didn't decide. Qasem Soleimani coming in the middle of the night, this remote part of Baghdad airport, not a lot of people around. It was a target of opportunity for the military, and the president decided to take it because when you look at the various options that they were considering for how to retaliate against KH and against the Quds Force, this was the cleanest it was the most extreme strategic option, but it actually was not the most extreme tactical option. So imagine if they had decided, we're going to take out Qasem Soleimani, but we're going to wait till he goes back to Iran. Think about the implications of that. Like most likely there would be other individuals killed, civilians, other Iranian military and whatnot, but also a strike inside Iran. Think about the large strategic implications of that. So they had this target, and they had a very short period of time in which to make the decision to take him out.
Now,
that's
Courtney,
really why I don't think people realize that they were in a time crunch to make the decision for what turned out to be a clean strike.
I've seen those pictures in the Situation Room. Now, here is the $64,000 question. When they talked about it, do you have any reporting yet, when they discussed what would be the likely secondary impacts, did they anticipate then Was it our intelligence later, or did someone inside the Iraqi government tip us that they would fire salvos of ballistic missiles at al-Assad, which were, as has been detailed in the Wall Street Journal and other places yesterday, perhaps the worst barrage any American installation has endured since, I think, Vietnam? I mean, this was a big barrage of missiles. Did they have that listed as likely consequence?
Yeah, they had a whole list of concerns, of possible concerns, and it was everything from ballistic missile strikes to massive cyber attack. But they first started seeing some of these ballistic missiles moving around in western Iran within about 48 hours of the strike to kill Soleimani. So kind of over the weekend. He was killed on Thursday night, early Friday morning, and it was over the weekend. They first started seeing them move around, and that was when the concern came. And one of the reasons, after the strikes on al-Assad and Erbil, I finally started to realize why people were so on edge about the possibility on Tuesday. And that's because, the U.S. and the Iraqis, these are Iraqi bases, they didn't have the kinds of missile defense systems that they needed to protect against these ballistic missiles that came in.
All they had were tunnels, right? They had tunnels.
Yeah. I mean, remember, the threat right now at al-Assad and these bases has been from ISIS. ISIS doesn't have missiles. So this equipment, it's not like the military has an unlimited supply of them. So they had pulled them out and put them in other locations. So when it became clear, literally only a day or two before the actual missile barrage came in, that this was one of the things that they might possibly do, people in the military were really concerned that they didn't have any way to defend.
And Courtney, last question. Do they think this episode is now done, sealed, over, and while it doesn't rule out future escalation, that both sides have returned to their corners?
No. I mean, the conventional piece is it seems to be done, right? So that's the U.S. military versus the Iranian military. But I think there's the two big concerns remain are the asymmetric piece. There's absolutely no one believes that is over. So that's Iranian-backed Shia militias and proxy groups that operate throughout the whole region. Also the threat from cyber. That's one that it always exists from Iran, but will it bump up because of this? And if there's any question about whether the U.S. believes that the threat has diminished, just look at the fact that, number one, they have not yet restarted the counter-ISIS and training mission in Iraq. And that's in large part due to the fact that they still have all their ISR assets. They still have everything so completely fixed on force protection that they can't focus on anything offensive.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that just shows that they are really still concerned about the threat.
Courtney Kube, great piece with Carol Lee. I have tweeted it out. Follow Courtney on Twitter at @CKubeNBC. That's capital C, capital K, UBE, NBC. She'll keep coming back. Thank you, Courtney.